We're studying gender stereotypes because we want to find out why primary education teaching is considered to be a women's profession in order to understand gender segregation in this discipline so that we can find out solutions to solve the problem of gender horizontal segregation across disciplinary fields.
To achieve this, we will start off by explaining the influence of stereotypes and how they are transmitted, as they are the reason for which horizontal segregation occurs. Additionally, we will expose horizontal segregation and its consequences, complemented by different studies, in order to be able to give out solutions at the end of our presentation. Nowadays, there are still stereotypes that affect gender, and they are so entrenched in society that even if we live in a modernized culture in which men and women supposedly have equal rights, the truth is different. Education is a lifelong process that starts when we are born. When children are little, they learn about how to adapt and live in current society apart from developing their identity, so the way they are taught is going to affect their future ways of living. There are several roles that society has imposed specifically for girls and for boys, such as being related to girls and blue to boys, girls crying and boys not crying, boys being brave and girls not. They are so interiorized that we consider them natural, but it is not like this. A researcher observed the behavior and attitudes of a classroom of 3 years old. One of them once said that pink is for girls and blue is for boys. This surprised the researcher and made him question himself. What influences a 3-year-old child to have those ideas at such a young age? To begin with, we need to distinguish between sex and gender. Sex is the biological and physiological characteristics that define men and women, while gender is the concept given to the social roles and behaviors that society considers appropriate for men and women. This is important to know because it is common to think that men and women have different capabilities, which reinforce concepts such as masculinity or femininity that determine the roles that men and women have to take part in. Femininity attends to the idea of women having to be gentle, patient, and caring, while masculinity attends to the idea that men have to be strong, fearless, and active. Believe it or not, this establishes professional roles for both. Men have productive roles like mechanics, and women have reproductive roles such as teachers.
What are stereotypes? Stereotypes are preconceived thoughts that are accepted by society and that generalize certain groups that form part of it, imposing how to behave according to the groups an individual belongs to. They're transmitted along with generations and are different according to the different existing societies. The reason why they're so interiorized is because they're present since birth. When we're born, different feminized or masculinized behaviors are expected and imposed on us, which establishes a pattern that we follow throughout our lives by habit. The interiorization of these gender differences has important educational consequences for children and society as a whole. Even if we think we can make our own decisions and we consider that they're not influenced by anyone else, they're influenced by years and years of education based on stereotypes, which make us not behave as we wish and act as we're expected to. So then, how are they transmitted in infancy and how can we avoid it? These stereotypes go on and on throughout childhood by the use of several resources, such as nursery rhymes, didactic material, traditional literature, family, due to it being the first socializing agent in which children learn how to behave, mass media, in which announcements directed to girls are different to ones to boys, and most importantly, the class, in which boys and girls spend most of their time in, relating to other children. So it's a place where values should be based on equality and free expression. Children here should be permitted to act, play, or be whoever they want to be, not basing their behavior on social constructs. This is why schools and families should act coherently, applying the same education to their children. But this process of stereotypification doesn't occur uniquely during infancy. It goes on nourishing throughout life. A researcher points out the image of the heroic male teacher in films and progressive popular literature, in which he takes risks and acts against the norms and conventions of this feminized profession. A clear example is the Dead Poets Society.
It is clear that there is a lower number of male primary school teachers, but there are many reasons for this and quite complex. As being a teacher implies challenging their masculinity, because being around children has been related to nurturance by traditional thinkers. Male continue not wanting to work as teachers. Some specific reasons for male not to choose this career would be not wanting to work in an environment dominated by women, with low status and payment, and not liking to work with children. There are social constructions that have been going on for a long time and supposedly try to explain how the world works. They give out the idea that males are supposed to be strong and resourceful protectors of their family, while on the other hand, it is expected from women to be supportive and caring. These constructions come from the theory that the two sexes are the same as the two genders. These beliefs that favor human nature in child development reinforce the idea that there are natural differences between gender. And this isn't true. The study showed that gender is a cultural construct. As gender discourses are influential in general society, it consequently influences education. Gender and sexuality have been significantly influenced in education ever since women started to take part in it in the late 19th century. When women started to be allowed as educators, males started to take part in other kind of positions, as they didn't want to be taking part in the same one as women. There started to be differences in the role of both genders and depending on age, subject, and administrative functions. Even though the appearance of feminism in the 70s influenced positively the perception of this profession, it still affects current society.
There are many studies that investigate this social issue. Here are two examples. The first one seeks to observe the changes of Spanish horizontal gender segregation in education. A study was made with the Dissimilarity Index, which analyzes a 10-year interval and shows how women are overrepresented in teaching with a proportion slightly above 60%. But this percentage changes depending on the different schooling stages. For example, in pre-primary and primary education, the percentage of women teachers is 84. Moreover, according to the study, from the year 2004 to 2014, there was an increase in male representation in education of 10%, going from 26 to 36%. These results corroborate the existence of differences in horizontal segregation and its decrease over time. The second one is based on an interpretive descriptive approach in which participants gave short answers to the research question, why are males underrepresented in pre-service primary education teaching courses at university, based on their experiences and opinions. The study sample was composed of 50 second-year female pre-service teachers. They suggest that even though men can take on the profession of teaching and even are capable of being caring, they can more easily be accused of sexual assaults. So this means that currently the image that primary educators have is still influenced by the traditional social expectations of gender, even though a more feminist approach was influencing positively in education. Studies say that society has substituted this movement by returning to the more traditional perspective. So to be able to attract more men to this career, the solution would be to talk to the ones that are working or studying in this sector, to give out a new discourse based on their experience. Teachers must act to change the mentality and the way that this idea is perpetuated in education and society. Only in this way, the perception of education can change into a gender-neutral profession.
So, what are the consequences of horizontal gender segregation in education? Even if there are no significant gender gaps in the quantity of education given to the different genders, the content of education given is the polar opposite. The teacher's function has changed throughout the years, being considered more caring, empathetic, and patient. The contrary is the perception of teachers in the past, which was a more didactic and teacher-centered approach, in which the teacher was the most important factor in the educational process. As this conception of teaching didn't imply that much of emotional implication, males weren't as upset with the idea of working as teachers. Secondary education has been more likable for men, as it is recognized socially for being more serious than primary education, which socially implies just taking care of kids. Teachers can show caring for their students in different ways, such as commitment, socializing, showing physical care, mothering, and expressing affection. Although there are all ways of caring for students, mothering is considered a feminine attribute, while on the other hand, commitment isn't. Femininity and mothering, associated with primary school teachers, are both characteristics that are identified as social constructs and increase the ongoing belief that it is a feminine profession, extending the idea that men dedicated to this profession are doing women's work. This leads men to not want to apply these kinds of attitudes, even if they're prepared for taking the role of a nurturer because they feel like they lose their masculinity. This construct makes men feel insecure and constantly reconstructing their masculine identities, but it has also provoked women to question the nurturance and caring abilities that male teachers have. A researcher concluded that teaching has to be perceived as a profession that requires caring as a responsibility. If this occurs, gender isn't relevant. It is a universal right for individuals to define themselves, but these definitions are never only imposed by individuals. They're very much influenced by the society and bonds the person is surrounded by, which means identity, as well as society, can change.
Throughout the years, horizontal segregation in education has decreased because stereotypes, such as those related with femininity and masculinity, have changed. Although there are some ways in which this process could be accelerated, for example, with coeducation. Firstly, we have to differentiate between mixed schooling and coeducation. Mixed schooling implies the education of both sexes in the same classrooms, giving them the same schooling and demands, while coeducation is based on providing real equality situations in which none of the students has difficulties achieving the same aims as fellow students depending on their sex. As young children are constantly learning and adapting to life, they tend to imitate their superiors. So to be able to achieve co-education, teachers must act free of stereotypical judgment. This is because if we aren't role models for children when it comes to educating on gender equality, we wouldn't be acting in accordance with what we are teaching, making it impossible for them to internalize the concept. A good way of impulsing kids to take part in activities or behavior that tend to consider more adequate for the opposite sex is by reinforcing them and motivating them when doing this kind of activities. Also motivating them to take part in activities that require working with boys and girls and expressing their desires and emotions freely.